A 12-year-old girl sells cookies to raise money for cancer, but when the day seems completely lost, the impossible happens. Clint Eastwood stops right at his desk and does something that shocks everyone. But that's just the beginning. Unexpected donations, inspiring words, and magical moments change everything. You won't believe how this story ends. Watch until the end to see how kindness and support can change lives. Madison stood at a table in the San Diego market, feeling herself getting heavier with each passing moment. The hot sun beat down relentlessly on her face, and the air was filled with the smell of fried hot dogs and sweet pastries from the permanent stands. She tried her best to keep a smile on her face despite the phenomenon that seemed to be bearing down on her like a mountain. But the longer she stood there, the more she lost faith in her idea. Her small table was filled with boxes of traditional cookies, wooden biscuits she baked herself, hoping they would help raise some of the money for her treatment. For a girl who had learned all week that she would have to undergo chemotherapy, this was her only chance. She couldn't afford to sit back while the medical bill continued to mount. But no matter how you looked at it, sales were terrible. Madison watching people walk by, not paying her the slightest attention. Everyone was laughing, talking, buying food from other vendors, but not from her. She looked at the register and saw that there were barely $20. It was so little that it didn't seem like it would last her a couple of days of treatment. She felt despair starting to flare up inside her. "Mom, we can't do this," she whispered, not wanting to show how much disappointment she was feeling. Mom, who was standing next to her, smiled weakly, but there was justification in her eyes. "Don't worry, honey. We'll do our best. You're not alone." But she herself was barely holding back tears. The day was drawing to a close, and the results were zero. Madison looked around the market again. She seemed out of place in all the hustle and bustle. No one cared about her little boxes of cookies. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but she couldn't. Instead, she looked back at her mother and tried not to think about how soon she might end up in the hospital, going through the worst moments of her life. When she was left with only a few minutes left before she decided it was time to pack up, a strange moment happened. The crowd around her suddenly changed its behavior. People began to whisper. Everyone was transfixed by something, that death was not so far away from her. Madison felt all attention suddenly turn in her direction. She looked around, and then everything she knew about impossibility changed. A man walked slowly through the market, dressed in ordinary clothes, but his presence was such that it immediately attracted attention. He was not a celebrity, but this man was not like everyone else. This was Clint Eastwood. Yes, it was him. The man who could freeze time with his gaze. Madison felt her heart leap in her chest. She couldn't believe her eyes when he walked up to her table, paused for a moment, looked at the cookies, and read the sign. It wasn't just a coincidence. He saw her. And that changed something. The crowd fell silent. Something in the atmosphere had changed, and now everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Will he just stop and walk away? Madison wondered. But Clint Eastwood surprised her more than she could have imagined. He leaned over the table, pulled out a wad of $100 bills and grinned as he put them in the register. It was a moment when everything around him froze. "You're strong, girl. Keep fighting. Don't give up," he said, giving her a few seconds to process what had just happened. How was this possible? This moment changed Madison forever. Madison stood at her table, feeling her eyes close with exhaustion. The heat was unbearable. Every executive was hot, and her hands had long since given up on her. She looked at her mother, who stood next to her, trying to support her, but her face was filled with excuses. They were at the limit. The medical bill kept mounting, and the cookies weren't selling. "Mom, this isn't going to work." Madison's voice was barely audible over the noise of the market. She was on the verge of giving up, but she couldn't. She couldn't, because there was a little heart beating in her chest that stubbornly believed that a miracle had happened. But every hour they spent in this market seemed more and more pointless. The day was almost over, and the cash register was still empty. "Don't give up, Madison," Mom said, but her words echoed. She was barely able to stand. "We're doing the best we can. You're strong. You can do it." But Madison didn't feel independent. She felt lost. She felt weakness seeping into every cell of her body until her dream of salvation became reality. But what else could she do? Something was wrong. Staying in that market for hours and hoping someone would buy cookies seemed impossible. One question kept spinning in her head. Why doesn't anyone stop? To realize that the whole world had abandoned her, and her efforts were in vain. Just when she was about to decide that maybe it was time to give up, something strange happened. Her gaze caught an unusual movement in the crowd. It was as if everyone froze for a second and then began whispering. Madison looked, and her chest tightened in surprise. A man was walking toward her. A man. He stood out from the crowd, like a bright star in a dim sky. And the closer he got, the more everyone around him began to pay attention to him. It was Clint Eastwood. She couldn't think about her eyes. It was impossible. This man was an icon, a symbol of strength and courage. How did he end up here, among ordinary people in an ordinary market? Madison froze, her heart pounding. He walked up to the table, slid over the cookie jars, and then stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. People who hadn't paid attention to Madison before were now staring at him, mouths open. But Clint Eastwood wasn't here to just grab a few cookies and leave. He leaned over the table, pulled out a wad of $100 bills, and put them right in the register without saying a word. Madison felt her breath catch. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. "You feel it, girl. Don't give up," he said quietly, but the words rang out louder than all the applause in the world. At that moment, Madison was speechless. The man who had become a symbol of resilience and strength had done nothing but the unthinkable. He hadn't just bought her cookies. He had given her something more, believing that her fight had meaning. But it didn't end there. What happened next was a real miracle. Madison stood there, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She, like Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, had just walked up to her desk, inserted a wad of $100 bills into her cash register, and said a few words she would never forget. "You're strong, girl. Don't look down." The crowd around her began to applaud, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest. But that was just the beginning. What's going to happen? Madison whispered, not believing her eyes. Her mother, who couldn't comprehend what had happened either, stood next to her, as if in slow motion, her face expressing a mixture of surprise and gratitude. They couldn't see this miracle, but it was real as never before. As the crowd continued to whisper and speculate, Madison thought her hope was growing. It seemed as if by some miracle, she, a warrior, had become real. She looked at the money in the register, a whole stack of $100 bills. It was more than she could have imagined. For the first time in weeks, she had a chance. But then, just when it all seemed so unlikely, Clint Eastwood turned to her again. He was looking at her in a way that made Madison feel her breath catch. It was obvious that his gesture was not just a casual one. He was looking at her with respect and attention, and maybe he wanted to say something more. But what? "You can do more than you think," he said, his eyes full of determination. These weren't just words, they were a challenge. His voice was firm, but there was genuine encouragement in it. What? Madison didn't think he was still talking to her. At that moment, she felt her strength come. Every step, every movement seemed to be filled with meaning. And then, in front of everyone, Eastwood did something that shook the entire market. He didn't just leave the money and walk away. He looked around, looked at the crowd, and then said, "You all saw what happened here. Why don't you help too?" The crowd froze. Everyone looked at him, unsure what he meant. But then, like magic, people started coming to Madison's table. Some of them bought cookies, others left money. And everyone said the same thing: "We can all help. You are not alone." It was a moment when everyone in the market felt like their support mattered. Madison stood in complete silence, her eyes filling with tears. She couldn't help but feel numb to what was happening. This was more than just buying cookies. This was more than that. This was faith. This was support. This was the strength of a community that filled her with hope. But what had happened could not yet be what she had expected. After all, it was clear that the world around her had begun to change. And when she turned to her mother, she was also shocked. But in her eyes there was now only one thing: faith in the future. Not knowing what would happen next, Madison decided not to waste time. She thought that now she had a chance. And this was not just a chance. This was something bigger, something huge. Clint Eastwood was gone, but his words and actions lingered after Madison's heart. And now she knew one thing: the fight was just beginning. But she wouldn't do it alone. Madison stood in the same place where, just minutes before, she had felt alone and discouraged. But now everything was different. A miracle she could not even imagine had happened. Clint Eastwood had not just given her money and words of encouragement. He had set off a wave that began to unravel her like a tsunami. The crowd continued to gather around her table, an unmistakable force. People began to come up and ask questions, and then give her money, buy her cookies, praise her for her courage and determination. For the first time all day, Madison felt like she wasn't alone, that people were supporting her efforts and were ready to support her. "You have no idea how much your cookies help," said one elderly woman, about keeping tens of dollars on the table. I'm fighting cancer too, and I know how hard it is. You're strong. Keep fighting. Madison was stunned. She couldn't understand why this woman had approached her, why she had left so much money. But one thought ran through her mind. This was the moment that changed everything. The kindness and support she hadn't expected to receive was the only thing. She felt like the world had abandoned her, that no one cared about her, but now she saw someone completely different. This is unbelievable, she whispered as her mother came over and hugged her, tears streaming down her face. Her mother couldn't think how everything had changed in an instant. From total despair to hope, from empty tills to overflowing. Each new person who came in had another charger and support. Then an older man approached the table. His face was lined and he moved with difficulty, but his eyes shone with determination. He was one of those who seemed to have survived everything: death, illness, loneliness. He looked at Madison with genuine concern. Girl, you know what it's like to go through a fight. I'm going through cancer, and it's not an easy road, but you can do it. I believe in you, he said, handing Madison an envelope with something in it. It's not much, but I hope it helps. You're not alone in this area. Madison felt something tighten in her chest. She could barely hold back the tears. This was more than just support. This was a genuine act of kindness that seemed to light up everyone around her. Thank you, she barely managed to say. Thank you for this. I will fight. The crowd continued to grow, and more people came to her, helping, supporting. And it was fortunate. Everyone brought their own bit of strength, and it all turned into something more than just help. It was a sign that she was not alone. The world was there for her, and she could move with it. When everyone had calmed down and the last people had left, Madison looked at her desk. The tape was full of money. But more importantly, she felt like she was part of something committed. She realized that she now had support, and not just in the form of money. She was surrounded by people who believed in her and her power. It was a real gift, one that might save her life. Mom, do you see? This isn't just money. This is faith in me, in us. Madison could barely contain her emotions. Mom hugged her tightly. You're right, honey. It was a miracle. But at that moment, she couldn't know that this miracle would only be the beginning. What happened today opened a door for her that she could never have imagined. Madison still couldn't believe what had just happened. Caught in the middle of this incredible wave of kindness, she felt every move she made was filled with new strength. The market, where she had been just another girl selling cookies a few hours earlier, was now a wonderland. Here she was, surrounded by people who were ready to support her, provide for her, and believe in her. But what happened next shook her to the core. After people continued to approach her, asking for money and words of encouragement, another person appeared. This man seemed to be a lifelong friend, someone who had seen and been through a lot. He walked slowly but surely, and his eyes were lit with determination. Madison felt the air around her fill with tension. Hey girl, do you know what it's like to fight for your life? He asked, coming so close to her that she could hear every word he said. What? Of course. I don't understand. Madison looked at him, trying to grasp the meaning of his words. You're not alone, the man said, his eyes reflecting all the pain he'd endured in his life. I've been through cancer. Go through it the way I did, and you're winning. I know it's hard, but you can do it. Madison felt herself freeze. Those words went straight to her soul. With each changed sound, it was as if a gateway to a future she could never have imagined had opened up. His words weren't just encouragement. They were a real call to action. He wasn't just telling her she wasn't alone. He was telling her she was strong and she could win. Do you really think I can? She whispered, still not believing that her life had suddenly become a profitable outcome, not complete safety. I know you're growing. Here's the money, girl. The man placed an envelope in her hand. Madison looked at it and saw that it held much more than just money. It felt like a transfer of power, a message that anything was possible. Thank you, thank you. Madison could barely get it out, holding back the tears that were already rising in her throat. Her mother stood by and watched the scene, tears streaming down her face. She saw her daughter going through this moment. But now, in the world of these gestures of kindness and support, she realized that their lives could change. And even if the path was a rock, it didn't seem so impossible anymore. Whatever the case, something happened that just couldn't have made the day any better. Several more people approached Madison, and their actions were no less astonishing. You have no idea how important what you do is, one of them said, voicing a couple $100 on the table. We all know what that means. These words were like another spark that lit a fire in her soul. She felt her heart fill with not just hope, but also confidence. She was not alone. These words, this flow of support became for her something she had not felt for so long. Strength, confidence that she could endure. The crowd continued to support her. People came up to her, asked about her story, and offered words of encouragement. But to Madison, every word, every gesture mattered. She understood that she was more than just a girl baking cookies at the market. She was a symbol of something bigger. Her struggle was not only personal, but also universal. As the day ended and the market began to empty, Madison felt that her life and the life of her family had changed dramatically. This was the moment when not only money came into their lives, but the truth that miracles do happen when you don't give up. Madison stood there, surrounded by people, feeling the emotions in her heart. The miracles continued to happen, and each moment became more overwhelming to her. People kept coming up to buy cookies or give her money, and each one seemed to be part of some grand plan she couldn't quite understand. But there was one person who made her heart beat faster than ever. This man, tall and shrill, came to her table, but this time he did not leave money or give the standard words. He looked at Madison, his eyes very deep, almost mystical. He stopped right in front of her, as if indicating what he had to say. It was something she did not expect. Do you believe you are learning to win? His voice was quiet, but so confident that Madison felt the entire market suddenly freeze. All eyes were on her again. Madison paused. The question wasn't just words. It was a challenge, one that went straight to her heart. There was something in his eyes that made her doubt his sincerity. She'd thought about it many times before, that maybe she couldn't handle it. But this man, his confidence was infectious. I don't know, Madison breathed, but I want to believe it's great. He appeared and seemed to penetrate her words. His gaze became even more determined. You are evolving, he said, and his words sounded like a sentence, like an undeniable truth. I went through cancer myself. It was scary. There were moments when I thought I would never get out of it. But you have to know, you are not alone. And all you have to do is keep fighting and never stop. Madison felt her chest tighten. Those words seemed to encapsulate the entire journey she was about to take. Don't stop. It felt like this moment was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. You're winning, the man continued, his words seeming to pave the way for her. Just remember, the main thing is to never give up. You're winning, and your story is an inspiration to thousands of others. Madison felt her heart fill with new strength. This man was telling her not just about winning, but about the importance of continuing to win, no matter what the obstacles. She felt something shift in her mind, like a light that she hadn't seen in so long was suddenly shining. But he wasn't done yet. His next move was the most unexpected. The man extended his hand to her and said, Here, take this. He handed her several sheets of paper folded into an envelope. This is my personal support. You are not alone. I will be there for you. Madison felt her breath catch in her throat. The money wasn't just a means. It was a gesture that said, You earned this, and you win. Thank you, she said shortly, still not understanding what was happening to her. Her hands were shaking with excitement. When the man left, leaving her with this incredible burden, Madison felt ready for the next step. She wasn't alone. She was part of something much bigger. And now that she had said those words, she knew the key was to keep going. Madison walked back to her mother, who was standing next to her, unable to hold back her tears. Mom, did you hear that? I can win. I know what happiness is. And in that moment, for the first time, she felt that hope might be within reach. This man became more than just a stranger to her, a real mentor who gave her more than money. He gave her faith in victory. Madison stood surrounded by a crowd of people, but this was no longer just a gathering of random passers-by. This was an army of support that came to her with every new step. Every word, every action was a step towards victory. A victory that she now believed in with all her heart. After the cancer survivor left her money and words of encouragement, others came to the table. These were people she didn't know either, but each one of them carried a huge dose of kindness and strength. Some gave money, some gave words, but all of them gave her something much more powerful, faith in herself. And then, when she was beginning to think that it was all just a miracle, something happened that shook her to the core. Finding herself in the center of this incredible support, she felt something begin to change in her life. She was no longer the girl who sold cookies to raise money for treatment. She was part of something bigger. She became a symbol of hope and strength, and people believed in her. At that moment, as the light began to fade, the market began to empty. An older man, who seemed to be just a passerby, approached the table. He acted inconspicuously, but his eyes, the very eyes that could see more than mere life, seemed filled with light. He did not speak for a long time, but when he came to her, he leaned over and whispered, "I survived cancer too, girl. I know what it means." Madison looked at him, her heart clenching. She couldn't even fathom that standing before her was a man who had gone through all the fears and pains that her predecessor had gone through. He continued, "You just have to not give up. Believe in yourself. You're not alone." "But how?" she barely managed to say. "How can I not give up when I feel like I have no more strength?" The man smiled, his eyes filling with understanding. "You're not alone, are you?" His voice was soft but firm. "You don't know how many people are supporting you. You don't see how many people are fighting for you. And you're winning. If you will, just go." These words entered her soul like a strong gust of wind, tearing down all the barriers of doubt. She felt that there was a strength inside her that she had lost long ago. Madison realized that she was no longer alone. She was not just a girl who survived. She had become someone who could inspire others, someone who had enough strength and courage to go to the end. As the man walked away, leaving her with a few dollars and a few words of comfort, Madison realized something. With every person who came to her table, with every word of encouragement, she grew stronger. People weren't just a worry. They gave her something more, belief that she wasn't alone, that she could make it through this and win. Madison looked at her mom. The look she saw was full of pride. Mom didn't say anything, but her eyes said it all. She was proud of her daughter, proud that she didn't give up. "I'm proud that Madison is now not just fighting for her own life, but becoming a source of strength for others." As the market began to empty and the last crowds of people dispersed, Madison felt her heart fill with incredible confidence. She knew one thing: she was not alone. And if this world was her reason, she would win. She stood with her head held high, ready for the next step. Madison sat on the edge of the table, looking at the picture that had just returned to her. Everything was as she had never imagined. With every step, with every word of encouragement, she felt her whole life changing. The world that had seemed so cold and merciless suddenly felt warmer to her than ever. She looked at her mother. Her mother still couldn't believe that all this was happening. And she, too, felt something change inside her. Miracles don't just happen in fairy tales. Miracles always happen to those who don't give up. "You have no idea how this is changing our lives," Mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the moment Mom realized that they could truly forget. Everything they had been through, all the pain, all the suffering, it wouldn't be in vain. It wasn't just a fight for life, it was a fight for the future. But Madison still couldn't think that all this was really happening to her. People she had never met supported her, inspired her, and challenged her. To understand that every person was not just an acquaintance, but part of the very army that was now fighting for her. They believed in her, and that was stronger than any medicine. All these moments, every word, every gesture became real incentives for her, pushing her further. And then, when it seemed she was already on the threshold of the next stage of her journey, something else amazing happened. When everything was quiet, when the market was empty, and the evening sun was already setting, an old man who had been standing on the back platform all this time came up to the table. He looked quietly at Madison and, without saying a word, put several more $50 on the table. "You need more than you think." His voice was soft but confident. "You win because you are not alone. And the world is with you now." Madison froze. Those words felt like the most genuine encouragement. Not just important. No, they were a reminder that she had power. They were confirmation that she could overcome. "You are not alone." That had become her motto. She was not just surviving an illness. She was part of something bigger, and the world was ready to help her. "Thank you," Madison whispered, not believing her words. Her chest tightened with powerful emotions. She felt like this day had changed her forever. It wasn't just another moment. It was a milestone. And now she knew that everything that was happening to her wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. When the last person walked away, leaving her with an empty table and pockets full of money, Madison felt incredibly tired, but also incredibly strong. She was ready for the next step. She was ready to fight. Now she knew she had support. "I will fight," she told her mother, who hugged her and said nothing, but her eyes said everything. She knew that her daughter was not just going through this now. She would win, and they would fight together. Always. Madison turned around, looking at the people who came to her, at every word, at every movement. They were all part of her journey. She was no longer just a girl who had remained a dream. She was a warrior. The enemy was significant, but now she had her best ally, faith. Faith in herself. And this day, this moment became her start to victory. Madison, a 12-year-old girl battling cancer, starts selling cookies to raise money for her treatment. But she couldn't even imagine that her life would change in one day. When Clint Eastwood makes an incredible gesture, everything changes. People start donating money and their support, and each new step leads her to victory. But that's not all. Every day she thought about how her strength grows, and finally realized that she is not alone in this region. The support, faith, and love of those around her give her a chance to live. This story will rock your heart. But how will Madison handle her biggest battle? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to the channel, like, and don't forget to click the bell to stay up to date with new inspiring stories.